At the family dinner, my daughter-in-law came up to me and whispered, "I'm pregnant with your husband's baby, you tacky old woman." I laughed out loud and said, "Don't worry, dear." Weeks later, I gave her a surprise that shattered her. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." I had been married to Cedric for 43 years. 43 years of shared breakfasts, quiet Sunday mornings, and the comfortable silence that comes when two people know each other's rhythms by heart. At 65, I thought I knew everything there was to know about my husband, my son Judd, and the life we had built together in our sprawling colonial home. I was wrong. It was a Tuesday evening in late September when everything changed. The dining room was warm with golden light from the chandelier Cedric had bought me for our 20th anniversary. The mahogany table was set with my grandmother's china, the good crystal glasses catching the light like tiny prisms. It should have been perfect. A family dinner with our son and his wife of 3 years. Lilia sat across from me, her blonde hair pulled back in that severe style she always wore, her green eyes sharp and calculating. She was 28, 15 years younger than Judd, and from the moment she entered our family, I sensed something predatory about her. The way she watched people, studied them, like she was looking for weaknesses. Tonight, she was glowing. Not the soft glow of contentment, but something harder, more triumphant. She kept touching her still flat stomach, drawing attention to herself in that subtle way she had mastered. Judd was oblivious, as usual. My son had always been trusting to a fault, seeing the best in everyone. He was cutting his steak with the focused attention he brought to everything, his dark hair falling across his forehead the same way it had since he was a boy. And Cedric. My Cedric sat at the head of the table, his silver hair neatly combed, his blue eyes, usually so warm when they looked at me, fixed firmly on his plate. He hadn't looked at me directly all evening. In fact, he hadn't looked at me properly in weeks. "Bessie, you've outdone yourself again," Judd said, gesturing toward the roast I'd spent all afternoon preparing. "This is incredible." I smiled at my son, but it felt forced. There was a tension in the air that made the food taste like cardboard in my mouth. Something was building, and I could feel it like the pressure before a storm. "Mother Bessie is such a wonderful cook," Lilia said, her voice honey-sweet, but with an edge that only I seemed to hear. "Such a devoted wife and mother. It's inspiring, really." The way she emphasized devoted made my skin crawl, but I nodded politely. "Thank you, dear." Lilia dabbed at her lips with her napkin, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "You know, I've been thinking a lot about devotion lately, about marriage vows, for better or worse in sickness and in health." Her eyes glittered, through all kinds of challenges. Cedric's fork clinked against his plate. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden quiet. "That's lovely, sweetheart," Judd said, reaching over to squeeze his wife's hand. "Marriage is about commitment, isn't it? Building something together." "Oh yes," Lilia agreed, but she was looking at me now. "Building something, or sometimes, sharing what's already been built." My heart began to beat faster, though I couldn't say exactly why. There was something in her tone, in the way Cedric continued to avoid my eyes, that made alarm bells ring in my head. "I have some news," Lilia announced suddenly, her voice cutting through the quiet. "News that will change everything for our family." Judd straightened in his chair, his face lighting up with anticipation. "What is it?" Lilia stood gracefully, smoothing down her dress. "I'm pregnant." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Judd's face transformed with joy, and he jumped up to embrace his wife. "Lilia, that's wonderful. He turned to us, beaming. "Mom, Dad, you're going to be grandparents." I should have been overjoyed. I should have been crying happy tears, rushing to hug my daughter-in-law, planning nursery colors and baby showers. Instead, something cold and ugly twisted in my stomach as I watched Lilia's eyes over Judd's shoulder. She was watching Cedric, and there was something triumphant in her expression. "Congratulations," I managed, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears. But Lilia wasn't done. As Judd released her and moved to pour champagne for a toast, She walked slowly around the table. She stopped beside my chair, leaning down as if to give me a congratulatory hug. Instead, her lips brushed my ear, and she whispered words that would haunt me for weeks to come. "I'm pregnant with your husband's baby, you old fool." The world tilted. My hands gripped the edge of the table so hard my knuckles went white. But somehow, impossibly, I laughed. A bright, clear sound that rang through the dining room. "Don't worry, dear," I heard myself say, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. "Everything will work out just fine." Lilia pulled back, confusion flickering across her features. She had expected tears, accusations, drama. My calm response had thrown her off balance, but as I looked across the table at my husband, my Cedric, who still couldn't meet my eyes, I felt something die inside me. The last of my trust, perhaps, the final thread of certainty about the life I thought I'd built. Judd was still talking, raising his glass, talking about new beginnings and growing families. His happiness was so pure, so genuine, that it broke my heart all over again. How long had this been going on? How many lies had I been living with? I raised my own glass with a steady hand, smiled at my son, and felt my world crumble into dust around me. The rest of dinner passed in a blur. I responded when spoken to, smiled when expected, played the part of the surprised but delighted mother-in-law. But inside, I was screaming. When they finally left, Judd chattering excitedly about cribs and college funds, Lilia shooting me one last satisfied look, I stood in my kitchen loading the dishwasher with mechanical precision. Cedric appeared in the doorway, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion. "Bess," he started, his voice rough. "Not tonight," I said without turning around. "I can't do this tonight." I heard him sigh, heard his footsteps retreat up the stairs to the bedroom we had shared for over 4 decades. But I couldn't follow him, not yet, maybe not ever. Instead, I stood alone in my kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of what had been my last innocent family dinner, and wondered how long I had been living with strangers. Sleep didn't come that night. I lay in our king-sized bed, listening to Cedric's breathing beside me, wondering if the man I had shared my life with was a stranger. Every small sound, the creak of the house settling, the distant hum of the refrigerator, seemed amplified in the darkness. When morning came, I moved through my usual routine like an actress playing a part. Coffee for 2, eggs over easy for Cedric, whole wheat toast cut diagonally the way he preferred. We sat across from each other at our small breakfast table, the morning sun streaming through the kitchen windows, and I studied his face like I was seeing it for the first time. "Sleep well?" he asked, not looking up from his newspaper. "Fine," I lied. The silence stretched between us, filled with everything we weren't saying. Finally, Cedric folded his paper and stood. "I'll be working in the garden today. The roses need attention before the first frost." Working in the garden? How many times had he said those exact words over the past few months? I watched him walk away, noting the slight stoop to his shoulders that hadn't been there a year ago. At 72, he was still handsome in that distinguished way that had first caught my attention at a church social 45 years ago. But now I wondered if I had ever really known the man behind that familiar face. After he left, I sat alone with my cooling coffee and let my mind drift back over recent months, searching for clues I had missed. They were there, like pieces of a puzzle I had been too naive to assemble. 3 months ago, Cedric had started showering at odd times. Not just his usual morning routine, but suddenly after working in the yard, or before dinner when we weren't going anywhere special. When I asked about it, he said he didn't want to smell like soil and fertilizer. 2 months ago, I had found a credit card statement with charges I didn't recognize. A florist in the next town, a jewelry store I had never heard of. When I asked Cedric about them, he said he was planning surprises for my birthday. My birthday was still 4 months away, but I chose to believe him. 6 weeks ago, Lilia had started dropping by more frequently. Always when Judd was at work, always with some excuse about wanting to learn family recipes or asking for advice about marriage. She would stay for hours, and I would often find her and Cedric having quiet conversations that stopped abruptly when I entered the room. "Just talking about the garden," Cedric would say, Lilia's interested in learning about roses. But Lilia had never shown any interest in gardening before. In fact, she had once complained that dirt under her fingernails made her feel absolutely primitive. Now, sitting in the harsh light of morning after, those conversations took on a different meaning. The way Lilia would touch Cedric's arm while they talked. The way she would laugh at things that weren't particularly funny. The way Cedric's cheeks would flush pink in a way I hadn't seen in years. I had attributed it to my husband being flattered by the attention of a young, beautiful woman. Harmless vanity, I told myself. Natural for a man his age to enjoy feeling appreciated. How naive I had been. The phone rang, jarring me from my dark thoughts. Judd's voice was bright with excitement. "Mom, did you sleep at all last night? I was too excited to close my eyes." "I'm still processing," I said carefully. "It's wonderful news, sweetheart. Lilia's already making lists. Baby names, nursery themes, everything. She wants to start shopping this weekend." He paused. She mentioned that Dad seemed really happy about the news. Said he got a little emotional when she told him. My hand tightened on the phone. When did she tell him? Last week, I think? She wanted to share it with him first. Said she was nervous about how you'd both react. Isn't that sweet? She was worried you might think we were too young. Last week. She had told Cedric about the pregnancy a full week before announcing it to the family. Why would she do that unless... "Mom, you still there?" "Yes," I managed, just thinking about everything we'll need to do to get ready. After I hung up, I sat staring at the phone, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with sickening clarity. The private conversation, Cedric's strange behavior, Lilia's triumphant expression at dinner. I needed to know the truth, but I couldn't bear to confront Cedric directly. Not yet. If I was wrong, if my suspicious mind was creating problems where none existed, I could destroy my marriage over nothing. But if I was right, I spent the rest of the morning in a fog, mechanically cleaning rooms that were already spotless, folding laundry that didn't need to be folded. Through the kitchen window, I could see Cedric in his garden, pruning the roses with careful, practiced movements. Marcus, our gardener, worked nearby, trimming the hedges with the quiet efficiency I had come to appreciate over the past year. Marcus was a gentle soul, maybe 35 or 40, with kind brown eyes and work-roughened hands. He lived in a small apartment above the garage behind the Martinez house next door, taking care of several properties in our neighborhood. Cedric had hired him after our previous gardener retired, and I had grown fond of his polite manner and dedication to making our yard beautiful. Now I watched him work and wondered if he knew, if he had seen things, if the whole neighborhood knew what was happening in my marriage before I did. Around noon, Lilia's silver sedan pulled into our driveway. She emerged wearing a flowing sundress that emphasized her still slender waist, her blonde hair catching the sunlight as she walked toward the garden where Cedric was working. I watched from behind the sheer curtains in our living room as she approached my husband. Their conversation was animated, her hands gesturing, his head nodding. At one point, she placed her hand on his arm, the same gesture I had noticed before but dismissed as friendliness. Now it looked like something else entirely. When she laughed, throwing her head back in that practiced way of hers, Cedric smiled, really smiled, in a way I hadn't seen in months. My chest constricted with a pain I didn't know how to name. They talked for maybe 20 minutes before Lilia glanced toward the house. I stepped back from the window, my heart racing with the absurd fear of being caught spying on my own husband. When I looked again, she was gone, her car backing out of the driveway. Cedric remained in the garden, but his movements seemed different now, lighter, like their conversation had lifted some burden from his shoulders. That evening, he was almost cheerful at dinner. He talked about the garden, about plans for next spring, about how excited he was to be a grandfather. He was more animated than he had been in weeks, and I found myself studying his face, searching for signs of guilt or deception. Instead, I saw something that might have been relief. "Lilia stopped by today," I said carefully. "Yes," Cedric nodded, cutting his pork chop with steady hands. "Sweet girl. She's nervous about the pregnancy, wanted some reassurance." "What kind of reassurance?" For just a moment, his knife stilled. "Oh, you know, first-time mother worries. Whether she'll be good at it, whether the baby will be healthy. Normal concerns." But nothing about Lilia had ever struck me as normal, and I was beginning to suspect that this pregnancy was the least normal thing of all. That night, as Cedric slept beside me, I made a decision. I couldn't live with the uncertainty, couldn't spend the rest of my life wondering if every smile was a lie, every kiss was betrayal. I was going to find out the truth, no matter how much it hurt, because living with lies was worse than living with painful reality. The next morning, I would begin my investigation in earnest. The investigation began with Cedric's study. Wednesday morning, after he left for his weekly doctor's appointment, I climbed the stairs to the room that had been his sanctuary for as long as we'd lived in this house. The heavy oak door creaked as I pushed it open, and I felt like an intruder in my own home. Cedric's study was exactly as he'd left it. Papers neatly stacked, books arranged by subject, his old leather chair positioned just so to catch the morning light. The room smelled of his aftershave and the faint mustiness of old books. I had always respected his privacy, rarely entering without invitation. Now I wondered what that courtesy had cost me. I started with his desk, my hands trembling slightly as I opened the top drawer. Pens, paper clips, business cards from doctors and contractors, nothing unusual. The second drawer held bills and correspondence, all seemingly innocent. But in the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of gardening magazines, I found something that made my breath catch. Bank statements. Not our joint account, but a separate checking account I didn't know existed. The statements went back 6 months, and as I scanned the entries, my confusion deepened. Large deposits, $5,000, $8,000, $12,000, appearing seemingly at random, and withdrawals, always in cash, always in round numbers, $2,000, $3,500, $7,000. Where was this money coming from? And where was it going? I photographed the statements with my phone, my hands shaking so badly I had to take several shots to get clear images. Then I carefully returned everything to its place and closed the drawer. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something crucial. The sound of a car in the driveway sent me scurrying to the window. Not Cedric's sedan, but Lilia's silver car. I watched her emerge, wearing jeans and a fitted sweater that showed off her figure, and head not toward the front door, but around the side of the house toward the back garden. This was my chance. I slipped downstairs and positioned myself where I could see the garden through the kitchen window. Lilia was walking toward Marcus, who was raking leaves near the old oak tree. They began talking, their body language suggesting familiarity that surprised me. I hadn't realized they knew each other well. Their conversation was brief, but intense. Marcus kept shaking his head, while Lilia seemed to be insisting on something. At one point, she reached into her purse and pulled out what looked like an envelope. Marcus looked around nervously before taking it and shoving it into his jacket pocket. Money. She was giving him money. But why would Lilia be paying our gardener? Cedric handled all the household expenses, including Marcus's wages. Before I could process this fully, another car pulled into the driveway. Judd's blue Honda. I watched my son get out and wave to his wife, who immediately broke away from Marcus and hurried toward him with a bright smile. "Surprise!" I heard her call out as she threw her arms around him. "I was hoping to catch you for lunch," Judd laughed, spinning her around. "What are you doing here, beautiful?" "I wanted to check on the garden with Marcus," she said smoothly. "You know how I've been wanting to learn more about plants since we found out about the baby." It was perfectly reasonable, perfectly innocent, but I had seen the envelope, seen Marcus's nervous glances. This wasn't about gardening. As they walked toward the house, I quickly moved to the living room and pretended to be reading a magazine. They came through the front door, Judd's arm around his wife's waist, both of them glowing with happiness. "Mom," Judd called out, "look who I found plotting with our gardener." "Plotting?" I tried to keep my voice light. Lilia laughed, that tinkling sound that always seemed slightly forced. "I was asking Marcus about what flowers would be best for a baby's room. I thought maybe we could plant a little garden for our son or daughter." Our son or daughter. But the baby wasn't Judd's, was it? The baby was. "That's lovely," I heard myself say. "Marcus is very knowledgeable." "He is," Lilia agreed, her eyes meeting mine with something that might have been challenge. "He's been so helpful, so understanding." There was something in the way she said understanding that made my skin crawl. Like it meant something more than the obvious. They stayed for lunch, Judd chattering excitedly about baby preparations while Lilia sat quiet and watchful. Every few minutes, her gaze would drift toward the window that looked out on the garden where Marcus was still working. She seemed nervous, distracted, not like the confident woman who had dropped her bombshell at dinner 2 nights ago. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" Judd asked, noticing his wife's distraction. "Just tired," she said quickly. "Pregnancy hormones, you know." But I was studying her face, and tired wasn't what I saw. I saw calculation, worry, the expression of someone whose carefully laid plans might be going awry. After they left, I watched Marcus work for another hour. He seemed agitated, glancing frequently toward the house, toward the street, toward his truck parked at the curb. Whatever Lilia had given him in that envelope, it had disturbed him. That evening, when Cedric came home from his appointment, he seemed distracted. He barely touched his dinner, pushing food around his plate while staring off into space. "Everything okay?" I asked, echoing Judd's earlier question. "Fine," he said automatically, "just thinking about the garden. Might need to replant the rose bed next spring." But he wasn't thinking about roses. His mind was clearly elsewhere, and the lines around his eyes seemed deeper than they had that morning. The phone rang just as we were clearing the dinner dishes. Cedric answered, and I watched his face go pale as he listened. "Yes," he said quietly. "Yes, I understand. Tomorrow evening. I'll be there." He hung up and stood for a moment, his hand still on the phone. "Who was that?" I asked. "No one important," he said, but his voice was strained. "I need to run an errand tomorrow after dinner. An errand, at night." After 43 years of marriage, my husband had never been one for mysterious evening errands. The next evening, Thursday, I watched from our bedroom window as Cedric backed out of the driveway at 7:30. He had been quiet all day, distracted and jumpy. When I asked where he was going, he mumbled something about meeting someone about garden supplies. Garden centers weren't open at 7:30 in the evening. 20 minutes after he left, I heard voices in our backyard. Peering through the curtains, I saw Lilia and Marcus standing near the garden shed, their conversation urgent and heated. Even from a distance, I could see that Marcus was upset, gesticulating wildly while Lilia stood with her arms crossed. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but their body language told a story of conflict, of disagreement about something serious. At one point, Marcus threw his hands up in apparent frustration and started walking toward his truck. Lilia followed him, grabbing his arm. They argued for another few minutes before Marcus shook his head one final time and got in his truck. As he drove away, Lilia stood alone in my backyard, her face illuminated by the security light, looking nothing like the sweet, innocent young woman my son had married. She looked calculating, desperate, dangerous. When Cedric returned an hour later, he was even more withdrawn than before. He went straight to his study and closed the door. I could hear him making phone calls, his voice low and urgent, but I couldn't make out the words. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together what I had witnessed. The secret bank account, the envelope of money Lilia had given Marcus, the mysterious phone call and Cedric's evening errand, the heated argument between Lilia and Marcus. None of it made sense if this was simply about an affair. But what if it wasn't about an affair at all? What if something much more complicated was happening under my nose? The next morning, Friday, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to follow Cedric when he left the house. I was going to find out where these mysterious errands were taking him. But first, I was going to search Judd's old room, the room where Lilia sometimes stayed when she visited during the day, because I was beginning to suspect that my daughter-in-law's secrets went far deeper than pregnancy and adultery. And I was right. Friday morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching my mood perfectly. Cedric left early for what he claimed was a hardware store run, but I had stopped believing his explanations. After his car disappeared down our tree-lined street, I climbed the stairs to Judd's old room with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in days. The room had been redecorated when Judd moved out, transformed from teenage chaos into a pristine guest room with pale blue walls and white furniture. But Lilia had made it her own in small ways during her frequent visits, a silk scarf draped over the dresser mirror, expensive lotion on the nightstand, a stack of magazines on the window seat. I started with the dresser, checking each drawer carefully. Clothes, jewelry, nothing unusual. But in the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of designer sweaters, my fingers found something unexpected, a manila folder, hidden like contraband. Inside were documents that made my blood run cold, bank statements from an account in Judd's name, showing transactions I knew my son had never made. Large withdrawals, always in cash, dating back almost 8 months. The amounts were staggering. $15,000, $20,000, $25,000. More money than Judd made in half a year. But it wasn't just bank statements. There were credit applications in Judd's name for cards I'd never heard him mention, loan documents for amounts that would cripple his finances. And at the bottom of the folder, a handwritten list in Lilia's elegant script. Northwestern Mutual, $45,000. Chase Credit Line, $30,000. Personal Loan, M. Santos, $18,000. Emergency Fund, $12,000. My hands shook as I photographed everything, my mind racing to understand what I was seeing. This wasn't just about an affair. This was about money. Lots of money. Money that my son didn't have. A sound from downstairs made me freeze, the front door closing. I quickly returned everything to its place and crept to the window. Lilia's car was in the driveway, and she was walking toward the house with her usual confident stride. I made it downstairs just as she entered through the front door, using the key we'd given her after the wedding. "Bessie!" she called out, her voice bright with false cheer. "I hope you don't mind me letting myself in. I was hoping we could have a little chat." My mouth went dry. "Of course. Would you like some coffee?" "That would be lovely." I busied myself with the coffee maker, hyper-aware of Lilia settling herself at my kitchen table like she owned the place. When I turned around, she was watching me with those sharp green eyes, a small smile playing on her lips. "You seem nervous," she observed, tilting her head. "Is everything all right?" "Just tired," I lied, setting her cup in front of her. "Didn't sleep well?" She took a delicate sip. "I imagine you have a lot on your mind. New babies can be overwhelming, especially when they're unexpected." There was something in her tone that made me study her face more carefully. She looked different today, harder somehow, like she had dropped some of the sweet young wife act she usually wore around me. "Lilia," I said carefully, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why did you tell Cedric about the pregnancy before you told Judd?" Her cup paused halfway to her lips. For just a moment, something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or calculation. Then the smile returned. "I was nervous," she said smoothly. "I wanted to make sure the family would be supportive before I told my husband. Cedric has always been so kind to me." "Kind," I repeated. "Very kind. Protective, even. He's been so worried about me lately." She set down her cup and leaned forward. "Has he mentioned that I've been having some difficulties?" "What kind of difficulties?" "Oh, just some stress, financial pressures." Her eyes never left mine. "You know how it is when you're young and trying to establish yourself. Sometimes you make choices that seem reasonable at the time but become complicated later." I felt like I was walking through a minefield. "What kind of choices?" Lilia laughed, but there was no warmth in it. "The kind that require understanding family members, the kind that require discretion." She paused, studying my face. "The kind that your husband has been so helpful with." My chest tightened. "I don't understand. Don't you?" She stood up, moving to the window that looked out on the garden. "Cedric is such a good man, such a devoted father. He'd do anything to protect his family, wouldn't he? Even if it meant sacrificing his own reputation." The words hung in the air like poison. I stared at her back, at the casual way she surveyed my garden like she was evaluating real estate. "What are you saying?" I whispered. She turned around, and the mask was completely gone now. What I saw in her face was cold calculation, the expression of someone who held all the cards and knew it. "I'm saying that some secrets are more valuable than others, Bessie, and some people will pay dearly to keep those secrets buried." Before I could respond, the sound of voices outside caught our attention. Through the window, I could see Cedric and Marcus having what looked like an intense conversation near the tool shed. Cedric was gesturing emphatically, while Marcus kept shaking his head. Lilia's face changed, a flash of something that might have been panic crossing her features. "Excuse me," she said quickly, heading for the back door. "I need to speak with them." I followed her outside, staying close enough to hear but trying to appear casual. The conversation stopped abruptly when Lilia approached, but the tension in the air was thick enough to cut. "Is everything all right?" Lilia asked, but her voice was sharp with warning. Marcus looked between Cedric and Lilia, his face troubled. "I can't keep doing this," he said quietly. "This isn't right. Judd's a good man. He doesn't deserve—" "Marcus." Lilia's voice was ice cold. "We've discussed this." "You've discussed what?" I asked, stepping closer. The three of them turned to look at me, and I saw guilt written across all their faces, though in very different ways. Marcus looked sick with remorse. Lilia looked angry at being interrupted. And Cedric. Cedric looked like a man who had been carrying a terrible burden for too long. "Bess," he said, his voice hoarse, "you shouldn't be out here." "In my own backyard?" I kept my voice steady despite the chaos in my chest. "What exactly have you all discussed that I shouldn't hear?" Silence stretched between us, filled only by the sound of rain pattering on the leaves above our heads. Finally, Marcus spoke. "I can't do this anymore," he said, looking directly at me. "Mrs. Holloway, there are things you need to know. Things about—" "That's enough," Lilia snapped. "Marcus, we had an agreement." "What agreement?" I demanded. Marcus looked at Cedric, something pleading in his expression. "Tell her," he said. "She deserves to know what's really happening." Cedric closed his eyes, and when he opened them, they were filled with a pain so deep it took my breath away. "Bess," he whispered, "I never wanted you to find out this way." "Find out what?" But even as I asked, pieces were clicking together in my mind. The bank statements upstairs, the mysterious errands, Lilia's veiled threats about secrets and protection. "It's not what you think," Cedric said urgently. "It's not what she wants you to think." Lilia laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, but it is exactly what she thinks, isn't it, Bessie? Your devoted husband carrying on with his son's wife. Such a cliché." I stared at my husband, searching his face for the truth. "Cedric?" "I'm not having an affair," he said, his voice breaking. "Bess, I would never—" He stopped, looking helplessly at Lilia. "But I can't explain without—" "Without what?" I pressed. "Without destroying our son's life," Lilia finished for him, her smile triumphant. "You see, Bessie, your husband loves Judd too much to tell him the truth about his wife, about what I've been doing, about what I know." The world seemed to tilt around me. "What you know about what?" Marcus stepped forward, his face pale but determined. "About the money," he said quietly. "About what Judd's been doing to pay his gambling debts. About the accounts she made him open, the loans she convinced him to take out." "Marcus," Lilia warned, but Marcus continued, the words pouring out like he'd been holding them back for months. "She's been blackmailing Mr. Holloway, threatening to destroy Judd if he doesn't cooperate with her lies, making him pretend to be having an affair to cover up what she's really been doing." My legs nearly gave out. I grabbed the fence post for support, staring at the three faces in front of me. "Gambling debts?" Cedric nodded miserably. "Online poker. Sports betting. It started small, but—" He spread his hands helplessly. "He owes over $100,000, Bess, to dangerous people. And she knows? She's the one who got him into it," Marcus said, his voice thick with disgust. "Introduced him to the sites, encouraged him to bet bigger. Then, when he was in too deep, she offered to help. For a price." I looked at Lilia, who was watching this revelation with something that might have been amusement. "What price?" "Silence," she said simply. "Cooperation. A marriage that gives me access to your family's resources." Her hand moved to her stomach. "And insurance for the future. The baby," I whispered. "Isn't Judd's," Marcus finished quietly. "It's mine." The silence that followed was deafening. Rain continued to fall around us, but I barely noticed. Everything I thought I knew about my family, about my marriage, about the past few months was crumbling like sand. Lilia clapped her hands slowly, mockingly. "Well," she said, "I guess the cat's out of the bag now. The question is, Bessie, what are you going to do about it?" The confrontation in the garden left me feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. I sat in my living room for hours after they all left, staring at nothing, trying to process the enormity of what I'd learned. My son was drowning in gambling debt. My husband was being blackmailed. My daughter-in-law was a calculating manipulator who was pregnant with our gardener's child. And somehow, I was supposed to figure out how to handle this without destroying everyone I loved. The next few days passed in a strange, suspended reality. Cedric and I moved around each other like ghosts, both of us knowing that everything had changed, but neither quite ready to address it. He tried to explain several times, approaching me with that haunted look in his eyes, but I held up my hand each time. "Not yet," I told him. "I need to think." And I did think. Constantly. About Judd's gambling, about how I'd missed the signs of his addiction, about Cedric's sacrifice, taking on the role of the unfaithful husband to protect our son from the consequences of his choices, about Lilia's web of lies and manipulation, but mostly, I thought about Marcus. He had quit the next day, of course, left a note saying he was moving back to his hometown, that his services were no longer needed. I found the note tucked under a flower pot by the back door, his handwriting shaky and apologetic. "I'm sorry for everything," it read. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I hope someday you can forgive me." But I wasn't angry with Marcus. If anything, I felt sorry for him. Lilia was like a spider, and he had simply been another fly caught in her web. It was Tuesday of the following week, when fate handed me the key to everything. I had been avoiding going upstairs, avoiding Judd's old room where I'd found those damning financial documents. But that morning, I heard running water in the guest bathroom, the one that adjoined that room. Lilia was here again, using our house like her personal refuge. I waited until I heard her go downstairs, then went to check that she hadn't left the water running. It was a silly excuse. But I needed to do something. Needed to feel like I had some small measure of control in this chaos. The bathroom was pristine, as always after one of Lilia's visits. She was meticulous about cleaning up after herself, leaving no trace of her presence except the faint scent of her expensive perfume. But this time, she had left something behind. It was tucked behind the toilet, probably fallen from her purse. A long white envelope, slightly crumpled. My heart started racing before I even opened it, some instinct telling me that this was important. Inside was a single sheet of paper with the letterhead of GeneTech Laboratories. A DNA test result, dated just 3 days ago. My hands trembled as I read the clinical language that spelled out the truth in black and white. Paternity test results. Mother, Lilia Catherine Holloway. Child, unborn, via amniocentesis. Alleged father, 1, Judd Michael Holloway. Excluded. Probability of paternity, 0%. Alleged father, 2, Marcus Daniel Santos. Not excluded. Probability of paternity, 99. 7%. I sank onto the closed toilet seat, the paper shaking in my hands. Here it was, the proof I needed. The baby wasn't Judd's. It wasn't even Cedric's, as Lilia had claimed. It was Marcus's child. But why did she have a paternity test? If she was planning to pass the baby off as Judd's, why risk confirming the truth? The answer came to me in a flash of horrible clarity. Insurance. This was her insurance policy. Her proof that she could destroy our family whenever she chose. She could produce this test at any time, claim that Cedric had forced her to lie, paint herself as the victim of a powerful older man. She was covering all her bases, making sure she had leverage no matter what happened. I heard footsteps on the stairs and quickly folded the paper, slipping it into my cardigan pocket. By the time Lilia appeared in the bathroom doorway, I was calmly checking the faucet. "Bessie," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "I didn't know you were up here." "Just making sure everything's turned off properly," I said, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "You know how these old pipes can be." She nodded, but I could see calculation in her expression. She was wondering if I'd found anything, if I'd seen something I shouldn't have. "How are you feeling?" I asked, turning to face her. With the pregnancy, I mean. Fine, she said carefully. A little tired. The doctor says everything looks normal. That's good. When is your next appointment? Next week. She paused. Judd's coming with me. He's so excited to see the ultrasound. My heart broke for my son. His joy was so pure, so genuine. And it was all built on lies. Lilia, I said softly, isn't there anything you want to tell me? For just a moment, her mask slipped. I saw uncertainty there, maybe even a flicker of guilt. But then the cold calculation returned. Like what? The truth. We stared at each other in that small bathroom, two women who both knew far more than we were saying. Finally, Lilia smiled. That sharp, predatory smile I was learning to hate. The truth is subjective, isn't it, Bessie? There's what happened, and there's what people believe happened. And sometimes what people believe is more important than facts. She moved past me toward the door, then paused. By the way, she said, her voice casual, I seem to have dropped something from my purse. You haven't seen anything, have you? My hand moved instinctively to my pocket, where the DNA test results crinkled softly against my fingers. No, I said steadily. Nothing at all. She studied my face for a long moment, then nodded. I'm sure it will turn up, she said. Important things always do. After she left, I sat in that bathroom for a long time, holding the paper that could change everything. I could show it to Judd right now, expose Lilia's lies, free Cedric from her blackmail, but I knew it wasn't that simple. Judd would be devastated, not just about the affair that wasn't really an affair, but about his gambling addiction being exposed, about the debt that had made him vulnerable to Lilia's manipulation in the first place. He might never recover from the shame. And Marcus, poor Marcus, who had been as much a victim as any of us, would be dragged back into this mess, forced to face the consequences of a moment of weakness. But as I sat there, thinking about Cedric's haunted eyes and Judd's innocent excitement about becoming a father, I realized that the truth had to come out. Not all at once, maybe. Not in a way that destroyed everyone, but somehow, some way, the lies had to end. That evening, I found Cedric in his study, staring at papers he wasn't really reading. When I knocked on the door frame, he looked up with eyes that held no hope. Can we talk? I asked. He nodded, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. I sat down and pulled the DNA test from my pocket, laying it on the polished wood between us. His face went white as he read it. Where did you... She dropped it. In the bathroom upstairs. Cedric ran his hands through his hair, suddenly looking every one of his 72 years. Bess, I can explain. You don't need to explain, I said quietly. I know you're not having an affair. I know she's been blackmailing you. I know about Judd's gambling. He stared at me in amazement. You know? Marcus told me. Before he left, I leaned forward. Cedric, why didn't you just come to me? Why didn't you trust me with the truth? His eyes filled with tears. The first time I'd seen my husband cry in 20 years. Because I couldn't bear to see you look at Judd the way you looked at your father, he whispered. The words hit me like a physical blow. My father had been a gambler too. Had lost our family home when I was 16. The shame and disappointment had colored my entire youth, and Cedric knew how deeply those scars ran. You thought I would blame him? I thought it would break your heart, and I thought I could handle it. Pay off his debts quietly. Get him help. Make it go away before you ever had to know. But Lilia found out. He nodded miserably. She encouraged it, got him deeper in debt than he could ever repay on his own, then offered to help. If I played along with her story about the affair, why? What does she get out of it? Time, he said simply. Time to establish herself in our family. Time to make herself indispensable. And a cover story for when the baby comes and doesn't look like Judd. I looked down at the DNA test again. She was going to blame you. Eventually, yes. Make it look like I seduced her, forced her into the affair, paint herself as the victim. He laughed bitterly. She's very clever, our Lilia. But not clever enough, I said, holding up the paper. She made a mistake. Cedric looked at me with something that might have been hope. What are you thinking? I stood up, smoothing down my skirt, feeling more determined than I had in weeks. "I'm thinking it's time for a family dinner," I said. "And this time, I'm going to be the one with surprises." The look of relief and admiration on my husband's face made 43 years of marriage feel worth fighting for. I spent 3 days planning that dinner with the precision of a military strategist. Every detail had to be perfect: the timing, the setting, the revelation that would finally free my family from Lilia's web of lies. Thursday evening, I called Judd and invited them for Sunday dinner. "Just family," I said, making sure my voice carried the warmth of a grandmother-to-be. "I want to celebrate the baby properly this time." Judd was delighted. "That's wonderful, Mom. Lilia's been worried that you were upset about something. This will mean the world to her." If only he knew. I spent Saturday cooking all of Judd's favorite foods: pot roast with vegetables, homemade bread, apple pie from my grandmother's recipe. The house filled with the rich sense of comfort and tradition, of Sunday dinners from his childhood when life was simpler and our biggest worry was whether he'd finish his homework. Cedric watched me work with a mixture of admiration and anxiety. We had talked late into the night after I found the DNA test, planning how to handle the revelation. He wanted to confront Lilia directly, but I convinced him that a more subtle approach would be better. "She thrives on drama," I told him. "She expects tears and accusations. We're going to give her something she won't know how to handle: quiet dignity and irrefutable proof." On Sunday afternoon, I set the table with my best china, the wedding set that had been carefully preserved for special occasions. The irony wasn't lost on me, using these symbols of marital commitment to expose the ultimate betrayal of marriage vows. Lilia arrived wearing a flowing dress that emphasized her pregnancy, her hand resting protectively on her still small bump. She looked radiant, glowing with the satisfaction of a woman who believed she held all the power. "Bessie!" she exclaimed, kissing my cheek with apparent affection. "Everything smells wonderful. You've gone to so much trouble." "No trouble at all," I said smoothly. "Family is worth every effort." Judd beamed, pulling out his wife's chair with the gallant attention he'd learned from his father. "Isn't Mom amazing? She could open her own restaurant." "Absolutely," Lilia agreed, but her eyes were watchful, studying my face for signs of the tension that had marked our recent interactions. She was puzzled by my apparent good mood, uncertain whether to be relieved or suspicious. We made small talk through the appetizers, Lilia describing her latest pregnancy symptoms, Judd sharing news from his work, Cedric asking gentle questions about the baby's due date. To anyone watching, we looked like a perfectly normal family celebrating new life. But I was watching Lilia carefully, noting how she deflected certain questions, how her hand moved to her stomach whenever the conversation turned to specifics about the pregnancy. She was performing the role of expectant mother, but there was something calculated about it, like she was remembering lines from a script. "You know," I said casually as I served the main course, "I've been thinking about family history lately, about genetics." Lilia's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Genetics? It's fascinating how traits get passed down through generations. Eye color, hair texture, facial features." I smiled at Judd. "You have your father's eyes, but my stubborn chin." Judd laughed. "Thanks for that, Mom." "I wonder what the baby will look like," I continued, my voice conversational. "Will he have Judd's dark hair or your blonde, Lilia? Will he be tall like the Holloway men or petite like you?" "It's impossible to predict," Lilia said carefully. "Genetics can be surprising." "Oh, but modern science is so advanced now," I said, taking a sip of wine. "They can tell you so much about a baby even before birth. DNA testing, paternity confirmation. It's really quite remarkable." The word paternity hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Lilia went very still, her face carefully blank. Cedric set down his fork, recognizing that we had reached the crucial moment. "DNA testing?" Judd asked, oblivious to the tension crackling around him. "You mean, like those ancestry kits?" "Among other things," I said. "They can also determine parentage with almost perfect accuracy. Very useful when there are questions about family relationships." Lilia's breathing had become shallow, but she maintained her composure. "What an odd topic for dinner conversation." "Is it?" I tilted my head. I think it's quite relevant, actually. I stood up and walked to the sideboard, where I had placed a manila envelope before dinner. My hands were steady as I returned to the table, though my heart was pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. "Lilia, dear," I said, my voice gentle but implacable. "I believe you dropped something in my bathroom last week." Her face went white as I placed the DNA test results in front of her. The paper seemed to glow under the chandelier light, its clinical language spelling out the truth in stark black and white. Judd frowned, reaching for the document. "What is this?" "Don't," Lilia whispered, but it was too late. I watched my son's face as he read, saw confusion give way to understanding, then to devastation. The silence stretched between us, heavy with the weight of shattered illusions. "I don't understand," Judd said finally, his voice barely audible. "Marcus Santos? Who is Marcus Santos?" "Our former gardener," Cedric said quietly. Judd looked up at his wife, his eyes pleading for an explanation that would make this nightmare make sense. "Lilia?" She sat frozen, trapped between denial and confession, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. "The baby isn't yours, son," I said gently. "It never was." What followed was the most painful hour of my life. Judd's face crumpled as the truth sank in, not just about the baby, but about everything. The gambling debts that had made him vulnerable, the manipulation that had trapped him in Lilia's web, the way his shame about his addiction had been used against him. Lilia tried to salvage the situation, spinning a desperate story about being forced into the affair, about Cedric taking advantage of her vulnerability. But the lies sounded hollow now, transparent in the face of documented proof. "You planned this," Judd said slowly, the pieces clicking together in his mind. "You knew about my gambling problem. You encouraged it." "I was trying to help you," Lilia protested. "By getting me deeper in debt? By using my shame to blackmail my father into playing along with your lies?" She had no answer for that. "And Marcus?" Judd's voice broke on the name. "Did you seduce him too? Was he just another tool in your game?" "It wasn't supposed to happen," Lilia whispered. I was lonely and he was kind." "So you destroyed his life too." Cedric spoke up then, his voice heavy with the weight of months of silence. "Son, I want you to know that I never touched her. I let you believe I was having an affair because I couldn't bear to see you face the consequences of the gambling. I thought I could protect you." Judd looked at his father with eyes full of pain and gratitude. "Dad, you didn't have to." "Yes, I did. You're my son. But I should have trusted your mother with the truth. Should have trusted you to be stronger than your mistakes." The cleanup was swift and decisive. Lilia packed her things that very evening, her suitcases stacked by the front door like a fortress of failure. She had nowhere to go, no family who would take her in, no friends who weren't connected to the lies she had told. "What about the baby?" she asked desperately as Judd loaded her belongings into her car. "You can't just abandon your grandchild. The baby will be fine," I said calmly. "I've already called Marcus's sister in Phoenix. She's willing to take you in until the birth, help you get on your feet." Lilia stared at me in amazement. "You arranged for me to go to Phoenix?" "I arranged for you to have a chance to start over," I corrected. "To raise your child honestly, without lies or manipulation. What you do with that chance is up to you." As her car disappeared down our street, I felt no triumph, no satisfaction. Only sadness for the pain that had been caused, and relief that the lies were finally over. 6 months later, I received a photo in the mail. A baby boy with dark hair and Marcus's gentle eyes. On the back, in Lilia's handwriting, "His name is David. Thank you for giving me a second chance." Judd had started going to Gamblers Anonymous, facing his addiction with the same determination he brought to everything else in his life. Cedric and I were closer than we had been in years, our marriage strengthened by the truth we had finally shared. And our real grandchild? The one born to parents who loved each other honestly? She arrived 8 months after that terrible dinner, a beautiful girl with Judd's dark eyes and his new wife Sarah's infectious laugh. Sometimes the greatest victories are the quietest ones, not the dramatic confrontations or public revelations, but the simple act of choosing truth over lies, forgiveness over revenge, and love over the fear of being hurt. I learned that at 65, it's never too late to fight for your family. And sometimes, the most powerful weapon isn't anger or accusation, but the quiet dignity of a woman who knows her own worth and refuses to let anyone diminish it. In the end, I didn't destroy Lilia. I simply removed her power to destroy us. And that made all the difference. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.